Well, look, I wanted to welcome you to the, this is a BAM group meeting, Bay Area Map Group, the first of the year, the third, I think, since the pandemic began, and I don't know how many since the Bay Area Map Group was formed as a part of the Greater California Map Society.
15 years ago.
15? Holy moly. I think I can safely say that we're here because of our love of history, art, science, exploration, place, and story, not to mention the camaraderie that we share for and with each other. And that includes all newcomers and non-members. We all have unique and eclectic interests, but we come together to celebrate, to learn, and appreciate. Let's see, I wanted to mention that there is additional material, a copy of most of the slides being presented, the presenter emails and their links, as well as a high resolution versions of some of the maps on the digital gallery at an exhibit I created for this event. And I'm going to put a link to that exhibit into the chat. And then also a copy of the video from the presentation will be available on the CMS website sometime in the next few days. And then just a couple of thank yous to the founders of BAM, who I know included Len Rothman in particular, and I believe also Nick Canis. And I don't know, are there other founders of BAM on with us?
Greg Mcintosh. He has moved to Turkey, where he is the world's expert on that great Turkish cartographer whose name I can't remember.
Uri Reis.
Uri Reis. And he's written books about it, and he's on considerable stipends from the Turkish government, and he's made it his home.
I'd also like to thank my colleague, Mike, for stepping into Len's shoes and has done an awesome job organizing this event with me. And then lastly, I want to thank all of the speakers for sharing your passion and knowledge with us. So with that, Mike, are we ready to proceed?
Sure. Should we get started with this first speaker? Just a reminder to mute yourself. We may mute you, you know, for if there's too much background noise. And so, if you want to speak, just check if you're muted before you speak, and if you need to unmute yourself.
And Mike, do you want to mention the chimes that you're going to provide to the speakers?
Yeah, since these are short presentations, just to help people keep on time and aware of the time, I'm going to ring a bell halfway through at 5 minutes, and then another bell at 9 minutes, and so just so people are aware of the time and can help time their presentations. And
we're trying to leave a couple minutes then after that for questions.
Yeah.
Or just a few questions.
Just a couple questions, and we may not get that many, so and you may have to bring them to the breakout rooms if we can't get to too many questions. We are on a pretty tight schedule, so if we're trying to keep things on time, we're just trying to keep things, keep the schedule working, so all the presenters have enough time. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Our first speaker is Elian Dotson. She comes from the Old World Auctions, and she is going to be giving us some information about map collecting and telling us 4 key steps to confirm the authenticity of a map.
All right, well, thank you all so much. I want to say a big thank you to the California Map Society for inviting me, and for Tom and Mike for organizing this event. So let's go ahead and get into it. When you're talking about authenticity and determining it, the most important thing is to really do your research. There is a lot of information about maps that you need to know and be aware of before you dive in. First of all, if you've got a specific map that you're taking a look at and you want to confirm the authenticity of it, you need to know the type of engraving, whether it's a relief map, such as a woodblock map, an intaglio map, such as a copper plate or a steel plate map, or a planographic map, such as a lithograph. What I'm going to focus on talking about today is identifying the authenticity of an intaglio map. So copper plate or steel plate maps, which do represent the vast majority of maps in the 15th through 17th century. The other important thing is to understand the type of paper that this map was typically printed on. So that could be either handmade laid paper, it could be woven paper, or wood pulp paper. And that is also another important aspect to determine the authenticity. It's always best to view a map from both the front and the back. So it's preferable to have it not in a frame to really, truly be able to confirm the authenticity. All right, so the first step that I always check for is a plate mark. And for those of you who are not as familiar, the plate mark is the impression that is made by the plate that is pressed into the paper when the map is printed. And as you can see here on this top map, you can see this little gray shadow of the plate mark that is indicative of the ink that was remaining on the plate when it was pressed onto the paper. And so it's usually, especially in 16th and 17th century maps, when copper was a very expensive material, it's very close to the edge of the printed map. And the shape and the size of it should match other examples of that same map that were printed. You can often both see and feel an indentation for copper plate and steel plate maps. Even if the map has been pressed to flatten it, you can typically still have some sort of a feeling and visual representation of it. So on this example, in the lower example, you can see there is no plate mark on this map. So this was my first clue when I was looking at this specific map at bottom, that it was potentially a reproduction. Now, there are some tricky situations when you're talking about plate mark. The first is that sometimes it can be faint or indiscernible. There must be some printer's ink in order to really see the plate mark very well. And in addition, sometimes if it's been pressed flat, it might be very hard to tell. It can also sometimes have been cut off of the map. Sometimes you'll see maps that were trimmed and you can no longer see the plate mark. Or if it is concealed by a mat, if it's in a frame, that can also be a situation to watch out for. There are also examples of maps that are reproduced, that are not original engravings, where they can fake the plate mark using a straight edge. So they'll take a ruler, for instance, and maybe put a little bit of ink on it and press it down on the sheet around the edge of the printing in order to try to create a false plate mark. And that is a situation in which you want to be able to confirm the plate mark with a known original so that you can compare the size and the shape. I don't think that's my bell. I think that's somebody's clock that I'm hearing.
No, you're good.
All right. So, that's the important thing to check, is the plate mark. The second is the quality of the engraving. And this does take a bit of experience, but intaglio printing will create inked areas that are slightly raised off of the paper. The lines are also very crisp, distinct, and continuous. So you can see on the map, the upper map here, you can see, especially here where you have cross hatching, that you can see all of the individual lines. They're very distinct from one another. When you get a reproduction, such as the lower map, those lines are really going to start blurring together. And that is a key indication of a reproduced map, because there are very few modern printing techniques that really can reproduce that crisp, distinct lines in modern printing. So you really want to focus on areas where there are a lot of lines that are close together. That's the best place to look. There are, however, again, here, there are some tricky situations to note. One is in which there is a poor impression. So it's simply either they didn't put enough ink on the plate, or they didn't wipe it down properly before they printed it, or the plate can be worn down after many years or many impressions that were made off of it. So those are two situations to watch out for. Now here's an example. On the left, a reproduction, and on the right, you have the original engraving that has a slightly poorer impression. So you can see in the dress area, in this yellow dress area, it's a little bit blurry, but if you look up here in the cross hatching, you can see here it's a little clearer that the lines are distinct. The third thing that I check for is the paper quality. Now, this is a very difficult thing to ascertain if you're not very familiar with the type of map and who the map publisher was. But handmade laid paper, for which most, especially copper plated maps, were printed on, they will have vertical and horizontal chain lines. So you can see that if you hold it up to light. The textured surface will be uneven. And there will often be watermarks that can be visible if you hold the paper up to light. Now, there are certain watermarks and certain types of paper, certain colors of paper, thickness that are consistent with specific map makers. So knowing how that map maker typically published it, or how that publisher typically printed the maps, is important to know. And of course, that takes a lot of experience. So one of the tricky situations here is, number one, it does require experience to know the types of paper that you should be looking for. And the second is, this is very difficult to determine in photos. So this photo is an example of a reproduced map. It is hard to tell, but it does appear much more even in texture. And you don't really see any signs of chain lines. And here you also don't see any sign of a plate mark, which you should be able to see on the back of the map. The fourth thing I check for is a centerfold. Now, this is not a fail-proof method. However, it is helpful in many examples because most folio-sized maps from the 16th to 18th centuries were published in atlases. And these centerfolds will be visible even after the map has been removed from the atlas. And they will even be visible after it may have been pressed. There are also typically more defects that will be found along the centerfold. So that's something to look for on an original map. But you need to know how the map was issued. So some maps were issued without folds. Some were issued with multiple folds because they may have been folded to fit into a smaller publication. So you really need to do some research and understand what you should expect in terms of fold lines for a specific map. And so again, here, if you have a situation in which it was a map that didn't have folds, this is not one of the steps that will help you determine the authenticity. So you'll need to look to the other 3 steps to do that. All right, some final thoughts. There is a lot of information in here, and I haven't been able to go over every little detail, but confirming authenticity does take a lot of effort, and it also takes experience. In lieu of experience, research can greatly help. And the best way to do that research is to compare a suspicious map with a known original. Now, the best ways to do that are to be able to find digital examples that are readily available online for free. You've got the Library of Congress, has over, I think, 60,000 images. The David Rumsey Map Center has over 100,000 images. We at Old World Auctions have about 70,000 images that are digitally available online. You can also look to the British Library, the National Library, National Archives of France and Australia. They all have really good digital repositories to find examples of maps. You should consider all 4 of the steps together to really ensure authenticity. Sometimes one will clearly identify a reproduction, but in order to confirm authenticity, you need to consider all 4. And as I mentioned in the beginning, these 4 steps are really primarily meant for copper plate maps. If you're talking about woodblock lithographs, you need to modify the steps. All right, well, I will stop there since the time is over. If we have a couple of minutes for questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anybody have any questions?
Eliane, I've got a question. So just as it relates to kind of the copper plates, and you see a number of maps that are like, essentially they leverage prior work done, and sometimes maybe even use prior engraved plates. Can you tell whether a map version is from essentially kind of a passed down plate, if you will, or a modified plate?
I mean, from looking at the plate, the only thing that you can tell if it was modified is if you can see signs of erasures. So oftentimes, because the copper was so expensive, if they needed to make changes, they would simply flatten out the areas in which they needed to make changes, and they would re-engrave over it. So sometimes you can see hints of where something previously was engraved on the plate. So that's one key thing to look for to be able to tell the different state or edition of the map. But really, we look to reference books that we have, that you can find reference books on maps of the world and North America and the British Isles and so many other different geographies, Africa. There's some great resources that will help identify the various states that exist of a specific map, or the various editions that were made of it or reproduced.
And just one follow-up is, like, I rely upon, when I buy maps, I rely upon the dealers I work with. I try to deal with dealers I know who are reputable. So I expect that they're actually doing this work before they sell the maps. And so how do you deal with this when you're looking at like buying online, maybe from a new resource or new dealer versus people you've trusted for years?
Again, I mean, I think you're right. You do need to go to trusted resources. You know, people always tell us they can find great deals on eBay, but we also hear lots of examples of people getting burned by buying things on eBay because you're dealing with people who may not have a lot of experience dealing with it. The reproductions that I showed in this example, I actually identified them from a major auction house that had listed it in their auction.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't an auction house that specializes in maps, so perhaps the person who cataloged it did not know how to determine authenticity for maps, but it was an auction house that does sell quite a few maps. And so, you know, that is something definitely to be careful of. You want to work with somebody who specializes in maps, because when you talk about paper and engraving and printing, there are so many different factors to know about a specific map and how it was published to verify the authenticity.
Thank you.
So
Great.
Lane,
Thank you, Eliane. I think we'll have to wrap it up there and maybe go to the next speaker if that's okay. Excellent. Yeah. So our next speaker is John Gibbs. He is the president and director of the California Map Society. And today he is going to talk to us about 3 maps of Boston, 1975.
Good morning to all in the western half of the country, and good afternoon to everyone attending from the eastern half. My cartographic heart is in the eastern half of the country, as I grew up in Philadelphia. So at previous BAM and GLAM meetings, I've brought along maps of the American Revolution from the year 1776, focusing on New York and New Jersey. So these 3 maps will be the prequel and what was going on in New England in the year 1775. So after 12 years of political struggle, focusing in the hotbed of New England, the American Revolution breaks out in 1775. So it's fitting that the first of the 3 maps that I want to quickly present is this a map from Thomas Jeffries in 1774. And it shows southern New England, the colonies of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. These are all up on the digital gallery. And Tom, if you can turn on the dots, please, and we'll go to dot number 4. And what I want to point out here is this wonderful cartouche showing the Pilgrims and the rock showing 1620, of course, in Roman numerals. And then adjacent to that, at dot number 5, there is a detailed inset of Boston Harbor. But what I want to bring your attention to are the 3 dots at the top of the map. So dot number 1 shows the Boston vicinity. And after the Boston Tea Party, the British Army occupied Boston. And out to the west, we see dots number 2 and 3. Just hold it right there, Tom. 2 and 3, Lexington and Concord. So the British knew that there was trouble brewing, and at Lexington and Concord in April 1775 were fired the shots heard round the world. So the Longfellow poem tells us that it was 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. Tom, can we just cone down right on a little bit more to show the Boston Peninsula? And then you can see Boston right there, and Charlestown is across the Charles River. So the British Army went to by sea, that is crossing the Charles River, and went out to Lexington and Concord to seize a cache of colonial arms and maybe nab some of the political leaders. Well, the first shots were fired at Lexington, and then at Concord Bridge in dot number 3, the militia gathered. The British retreated to Boston, and they came under heavy fire from the militia firing at them from behind rocks and so on. The British sustained heavy casualties. Now, the second map, this is a very charming map. This one is from the Leventhal Center at the Boston Public Library. The first map was from the Rumsey Center at Stanford. Let's take a look at the map, point number one. So point number one shows Boston Neck, and Boston itself was occupied by the British Army, and the Royal Navy controlled the harbor. But the militia was now, after Lexington and Concord, pouring into the countryside and hemming in the British. At point number two, in June of 1775, the British command wakes up and they find that the Americans have fortified this position in Charlestown. Well, the British general is General Gage, and he can't put up with these upstart Americans putting cannon out there where they can threaten him. So he orders an attack on the positions at Bunker Hill, and this is point number 4. And this is where takes place what has come down to is known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. So let's now go to the third map, Tom. And this is a map called the Plan of Action at Breeds Hill, where the battle actually took place. It's come down to be known to us as the Battle of Bunker Hill. There are several versions of this map. This is actually a later one, published in 1797 in New York. And this also comes from the Leventhal Map Center at the British Public Library. Well, so now we have the morning of June 17th, 1775. The British are forming up for battle, and at dot number 1, Royal Navy ships move into the river, Charles River, and begin to bombard the American positions at Bunker Hill or Breeds Hill. Now let's zoom into number 5. And number 5 shows Warren's Redoubt, which is the center of the American fortification. It's an earthwork, and it's named after Dr. Joseph Warren, who is a citizen soldier, a very prominent physician in Boston, and really a man of many parts. He actually wound up giving his life here at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, dot number two, Tom, this is where the British make their landing. The map is graphically presented with the British positions in red and the American positions in blue. And at dot number 3 shows the eventual success of the British in capturing the American positions, but it's only on the 3rd British assault when the American ammunition runs out. Dot number 4 shows the escape route of the Americans off the Charlestown Peninsula. So this was a victory of sorts for the British, but it came at great cost, and the lessons of attacking Americans in fortified positions and the carnage that it resulted for the British Army was never forgotten by the British command. So George Washington arrives to take command a month after the Battle of Bunker Hill. And let's now go back to the previous map, Tom. So George Washington takes command, and there's pretty much stalemate in the remainder of 1775 and the first couple of months of 1776. And then let's cone down on number 3, because in March 1776, George Washington takes advantage of an oversight by the British. And he fortifies this position on Dorchester Hill. And from here, his cannon threaten the British. And there's a negotiation, and the British General Gage has to evacuate Boston because otherwise the cannon will fire upon him. He evacuates, he takes the Loyalists and his army, and he sails off to far off Nova Scotia. This takes place on March 17th, 1776, and it is still known today as Evacuation Day. So the Americans know that the British will have to return. They returned to New York the following July, but this is the prequel story in Boston. And let's go two images ahead. And this is the historic background to the book that I wrote and published this year, The Long Shot, The Secret History of 1776. Many members have actually read and posted nice reviews on that, and I thank you very much. And there's the bell, and I should have about 30 seconds left. I'll take a breath. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ron.
And just to chime in, thank you, Ron. Leventhal, you meant to say Boston Library, not, of course, British Library.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, Jim.
Any questions for Ron?
Ron, just a quick question. What was the population of the civilian population of this area, Boston and the suburbs?
Thanks, Jay. Boston was the third largest city in British North America, had a population at this time of 10,000. New York was second with 20,000. Philadelphia was the largest with 30. And Charleston in South Carolina also had around 10,000. Almost everybody, the 3 million plus people living in the colonies, mainly lived on farms.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Tom, for running the maps for me.
Mike, are we ready to move on?
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move on. So our next presenter is Julie Sweetkind Singer, and she comes to us from Stanford University. She's the Associate University Librarian for Science and Engineering Libraries, and she's going to be presenting Army Map Service City Plans.
Hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So over the course of the last number of years, I've increasingly been interested in World War II mapping, and we've done a fair amount of scanning of maps out of our collection that are related to the Second World War. We've scanned topographic map sets, Office of Strategic Services maps, European front maps, and Army Map Service city plans. We've been working on cataloging and scanning World War II maps captured from the German and the Japanese. I've just written an article with a colleague at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville that's being peer reviewed on the captured maps and how they came to be in our libraries. So hopefully after that is published, I'll be able to present on that as well. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the Army Map Service plans that we have in our collection and discuss them a little bit about them and how you can find access to them. Sorry, I lost my pointer here and get to the second slide. There we go. Carrying out efficient warfare requires a near endless supply of up-to-date cartographic information for a multitude of purposes, from reconnaissance to tactical planning, from ground operations to battle, and from relief efforts to rebuilding. World War II was no exception. The scope of the conflict was so vast that mapping was needed on a scale never before seen. In the United States, part of the mapping work for the war effort was carried out by the Army Map Service, or the AMS, primarily located in Brookmont, Maryland. The predecessor to the Army Map Service, the Central Maps Reproduction Plant, came into being to support the mapping needs of the Army Corps of Engineers during the First World War. It was renamed the AMS in 1942, and on its main campus employed over 3,000 people who first revised and then created maps at all scales necessary to serve the needs of the war effort. Nearly all of the maps were medium to small scale, but a handful of large scale city plans were created for a small number of countries. Stanford's map library holds about 400, either made directly by them or reprinted from work done by the Great British War Office, General Staff, Geographical Service, or GSGS. 3 regions are covered: Far East Asia in 248 maps, North Africa in 88 maps, Europe in 54 maps. The maps cover a very narrow date range from 1942 to 1948, with the earliest imprints in Algeria and Morocco and the latest from France. They range in scale from 1 to 5,000 to 1 to 14,000, with the most detailed maps tending to be the ones originally produced by the GSGS. Now I'm going to take you through 3 slides that show you just a few of the maps that are here by specific subjects. The first is about North African Jews. A handful of African maps show evidence of a Jewish population living in Algeria and Tunisia. Evidence of this is through the specific notation of the cemeteries for Jews or Israelites and buildings labeled as synagogues. Jews lived and thrived in Northern Africa for hundreds of years. Their numbers increased after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. They lived in places such as Tlemcen and Oran in Algeria, Sfax, Kairouan, and Susa in Tunisia. After World War II, the Jews moved again, this time to Israel or to France. The traces of their long history in Northern Africa are mostly gone now, with the cemeteries relocated or covered, their neighborhoods changed, and the synagogues removed. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, the first on Hiroshima and the second on Nagasaki. These bombs killed hundreds of thousands of people, caused massive damage to the cities, and left the 2 cities in ruins with untold suffering by those who survived the horrific attacks. These maps serve as a remembrance to all of those who lost their lives on the day and thereafter due to the bombings. Kokura, which you see on the left, was selected as the second city to be bombed after Hiroshima using a plutonium bomb. In the months prior to the August date, the city was not bombed using conventional weapons, as the United States military wanted to be able to more accurately measure the impact of the bomb. The city was spared due to cloud cover on August 9, 1945. When one reviews the map, it is possible to speculate as to why this place was chosen. The center of the city is dominated by the Kokura arsenal, which includes production of light tanks, small arms, shell casings, ammunition, receiving casings, and forgings. Ceramic works, paper and rice mills, steel works, barracks, and the railroad terminus surround the arsenal. The data was compiled in 1945 from aerial photography collected by 3 sorties, all dated June 1944, as well as from other sources dating back to 1931. Each year, the citizens of Kokura gather to remember those who lost their lives in Nagasaki due to a twist of fate. On the right side, you see Nagasaki. Nagasaki was bombed using the plutonium bomb on August 9, 1945, resulting in the death of an estimated 100,000 people. Nagasaki is depicted as a port city surrounded by green hills. Shipping played a large role in the life of the city, as can be seen by the size of the dockyards, the dry docks, and the rail yards terminating at the water. Aerial photography was used repeatedly in 1944 and in March of 1945 to compile the most up-to-date information. Compilation methods and the exact sorties are noted. This map was printed in August 1945 and shows no sign of destruction. Mapping in the Philippines was uneven, forcing the Army to look for information from a wide variety of sources. The maps of the Philippines show greater variation in information sources and style than any other in this series of city plans. All are dated 1944, but the actual date of the information on the map varies widely depending upon the underlying source data. On the left, you see the map of Ormoc. It was originally created by the Manila Fire Insurance Association in 1926. The map appears to be hand-drawn. Each block is labeled with a number. The Fire Insurance Association probably had a block book that would then detail the composition of the buildings in each block. The Legazpi map in the center appears to be a hybrid of information. The underlying data on the land bears a strong resemblance to the local cartography seen on other maps of the area in terms of its symbology and the depiction of the land. No mention is made of the source of the land data. The water data is copied from the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey chart 4237. Soundings are clearly marked with typeset numbers, and on the land we see printed information about a landing field and the hospital.
Yeah.
On the far right, you see the Malaquisi Map Design is one that is immediately recognizable to people who are used to looking at AMS map series maps. The colors, layout, symbology, and typography, and the map information all conform to the standard output. The town is situated in the center of the map, surrounded by clearly labeled features: rice fields, palm and coconut trees, bamboo forests, brushwood orchards, and wooded areas. The map was compiled using a 1914 base map, updated with vertical and oblique photographs taken in 1940. These city plans, along with thousands of other AMS maps, were distributed to libraries after 1945 by the U.S. Army Topographic Command, or TOPCOM, in appreciation for libraries supporting the Army with maps throughout the course of the war. I've created an exhibit of these maps where you can look at and download the images seen here, as well as all of the other maps that are in the series, of which I said there are about 400. They're part of a subset of AMS maps produced during World War II. A number of people helped with this project, including Andrea Olson, Tamara Ravid, Peter Crandall, our digital production group, and Megan Trott. So I'd like to make sure to give my thanks to all of them.
Thank you, Julie. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Julie.
Anybody have any questions for Julie?
Julie, hi, this is Ron. So wonderful presentation. At the very outset of the war, what was the state of maps of Asia in particular available to the United States Command?
You know, I don't think it was very much, Ron. From what we've read, what I've read, I can't give you a definitive answer. Someone on the call may know more than me, but what I do know is at the beginning of the war, the Army Map Service was so lacking in maps that they put out a call to individuals, companies, and libraries across the nation and asked that these maps be mailed to Washington so that they can use them. They used a lot of maps out of New York Public Library and the Library of Congress. And the libraries and corporations and individuals really responded very robustly and mailed in their maps. So I don't think the mapping of Asia was very strong. And I think there were a lot of maps missing of Europe as well. One of the reasons that they distributed the maps after the war is because they felt that if there was going to be another war, they wanted to be able to know that the maps had been distributed widely and they could call them back if needed. So they realized that not producing and distributing maps was really a problem in terms of the war effort.
Thank you. That's what I thought the status was. Great detail.
Julie, I presume part of the strength of this collection is that you have a large collection of maps that have a consistent sort of quality and style and a standard level of standards. Is that true, or is there a wide variety of
Yeah, you know, I think that's true. And it's interesting. It was really interesting to me to look at these city plans because I'm so used to looking at these Army Map Service topographic map sets, and they're so standard. They just all look the same. They have the same look, feel, information. They give a lot of information about where they're pulling their data. But when I started to look at these city plans, I realized that simply wasn't true for these maps. They were especially the Philippines, they were looking for anything they could find just to create these maps. So it was really interesting to me to see early sort of the production of these maps that was work for them to make and understand and try to get the content they needed. As I was reading about these maps of the Philippines, especially the history of this, there were people that were survey people that were going on the ground and just that the cartographic unit would follow behind them, making the maps as they were actually walking the space and mapping it just to get the content out more quickly, which reminded me a lot of 18th century war mapping as well. It was like, wow, some things haven't changed in this period of time. And of course, this is before you get a lot of the aerial photography. It was coming in the 30s and the 40s, but not always as used as much, I think, in some areas as others.
Great, thank you. That's wonderful. Tom, are we ready to?
I think we are.
Yeah,
I
breakout
think we
rooms?
are. Let me set them up.
Got time for one more quick question?
Sure. Hey, Wes.
Okay, Julie,
Hi, Wes.
would you just comment on, or maybe elaborate on the rarity of the actual printed maps once they were printed? How available are these?
Oh, very. I think you'll find them in almost any major university map collection. I think there were 143 depository libraries where Army Map Service maps were sent out. So they're not rare. They're widely available. And as I and my colleagues are scanning these, hopefully other map libraries won't have to, so that we can leverage each other's work. But these are quite common.
And are they common through distribution to government and libraries, or were they actually sold ever to the public?
Not that I know of. I've never heard that they've been sold, but I also, Wes, have to tell you, I haven't heard they weren't. But I have not seen them sold. My guess is you're going to see more of these come up on the market for sale because map libraries are downsizing some. And if they know they've been scanned and are online, these are things that people may decide, they're not that rare. They're all scanned. It's okay for our map library to pass these out to others who would be interested. So I wouldn't be surprised as interest in World War II mapping increases that you see more of this content coming up for sale.
Okay, so we are going to, I've got 3 rooms. There's one with, there's 3 rooms, one with each with the name of one of the 3 speakers. And so I'm going to open the rooms, and then you should choose the room that you want to go to. And for those of you that can't choose for any reason, text us where you want to go, and we will put you there. And then I will also, I think a minute or so before we close the rooms, you'll get a notice in the room. And then I think after that, Mike, we're going to take a break for 10 minutes.
We'll have a 10-minute break after that. So.
Okay, so here we go.
And so
you should, Mike, can you see the choices? So there's.
Yes, so you have to click on your breakout room. If I can share screen, we have a little bit of a slide to help you there. You're looking for this breakout room little icon there at the bottom, most likely at the bottom of your screen. If you move your cursor, you should be able to see it. And if you don't see that, there might be a more button and you can select breakout rooms.
So Elian, I'm going to assign you to your room. Let me do that. And let me see who else I need to assign first. Ron, I need to assign you, Ron. Okay. We've got people joining rooms. That's good. For those of you who are remaining, Len, where do you want to go? If you can, Eleanor, you want to go to Julie. All right, hold on. Edward to Julie's.
What do we have to click to join a room?
So you'll click there's a little breakout room icon down at the bottom of your screen if you have.
Yes, I've opened up the breakout rooms.
And then do you get a selection where you can select a breakout room to go to?
A separate selection? No, I see the names of everybody in the rooms.
So yeah, at the top there will be the name of the breakout room by the speaker name, and then there should be a join on the right-hand side.
Don't see the join. Oh, there I go. You have to, it opens up if you put your cursor over the number in the room.
Okay.
I'm afraid I can't see it.
Ditto here, Jim Jeffrey.
Okay. If you can't see it, then go ahead in the chat room. If you can select the chat box
Okay.
and then type in the name, and we will try to assign you here.
Okay. I don't see chat box.
So if you
Okay.
move your cursor kind of
Right.
maybe at the bottom of your screen.
I can't see it.
Tina, I'm going to get you, Tina.
Who do you want to go to, Dorothy?
Oh, who do I want to go to?
Yeah.
I'll go to Eliane's room, if that's
Great.
okay, or whoever's room is empty.
And Jim would like to go with Michael Schmidt because he's got a cat face, or Claudia, who's got a Stave Kirche as her picture.
I'll go to the emptiest room, whatever you choose.
Okay, they're all pretty good traction here. I'll put you into Ron's room, okay?
Okay, very good.
Tom, this is Fred. Could you put me in Julie's room?
Yep.
This is Bob Graham. Just pick me a room, please.
Okay.
I can't figure out.
All right. There you go. Lena, give me a second. I'm looking at the Harry. Harry to, that's Ron. Okay. Len Rothman. You're muted, Len.
Okay.
There you go, Len.
I'd like to be with Juliet Sweetkind.
You're going. There you go. All right. Louis. We've still got a few more. Steve Hannon.
Eliane's room.
Okay.
I don't
Julie's room, please.
Louise, give me a second. Okay. Where did Len want to go? Len wanted to go to Julie. I thought I put him there. Megan?
I will go to Julie's also.
Okay. Jim Jeffrey? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I'm fine with anything.
All right. Mystery. Jacob, we should have a separate room here, and Mike, and we can talk about the Tabla Puttingeriana.
Oh, is that right?
I just wanted to say hi to Mike. Yeah,
Hi, Jacob. You're the
I've
expert.
reinterpreted the Tabula Puttingeriana as a subway map.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I'll send you, if Tom, you could send me Mike's email, I'll reach out to you separately.
Yeah, that'd be
about
great.
Paige, where do you want to go?
Eliane's room, please.
Yep. Okay. And Therese.
Can you put me in with the first speaker?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom, I didn't have co-host. I can't assign people because
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm
No,
sorry.
It's okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, I just felt not very helpful for this last.
Feel free to jump in and tell me that. I'm sorry. I did not. That's just
that's okay.
My bad.
Yeah. So and I won't be able to help. Not that I was any help this time, but then in the next group. So if
what did that take? What did that take us? That probably took 5 minutes to do all that.
Yeah, at least.
It's too long.
At
so
least 5 minutes. That's a long time. Can maybe Dave
help with that?
He's good with. Would he be willing to?
Yeah. So let me. Well, how long do you think we should give him?
So we're the
break starts at 11:01.
Yeah, the break starts at 11:01. So I mean, I think we're doing okay on time. I mean, 10 minutes. We might run out of time, but I mean, I think that's fine. I think.
Do you want to?
We can stick to the schedule. Yeah. If we want to do it at 11, finish out at 11, then that'll give us an extra minute. Does that make sense?
I was going to give him like 11:02 or 3, sure. Just because we it just took so long to get.
Sure, we can do that.
Is that all right?
Yeah. I think that sounds fine.
Hi, Sherry. Do you want to go to one of the breakout rooms? I can't. You're muted. If you need to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. No, that's okay. I
Okay.
was just sort of we're an hour earlier, so I was eating breakfast previously and
Okay,
running around doing weird things. So yes, I'm glad to be here though.
good.
And I'm
Well,
glad you're doing such a great job on Facebook. I really like it.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you for participating. It's, yeah, there's a lot to share.
Yeah, no, it's good.
A lot to share. All right, I'm going to step away from my computer here for a second. Be right back.
Hey, Tom. I think you're muted or something.
Hey, how'd that go?
Good, good, good.
Well,
No, I couldn't find a way to find. Maybe I need to update my Zoom version. I didn't see a place to link on.
Hey, Tom, I think the time was too short. We were just getting warmed up.
You just getting warmed
You
up?
always think time is too short.
We had a wide-ranging discussion, and we had 18 people, and it was really fun.
That's great.
Very nice.
At least for me.
That's great. Well, we're going to take a break now, and we're going to reconvene in
10 minutes?
8 minutes at 11. We're on 11:11.
11:11. Yeah. 8 minutes to.
Super,
Great. Okay.
super. Thank you.
Steve Hannon,
Yeah.
would you, if I make you a co-host, if you have the ability, I could use the help of somebody to assign people when we break out. I'll make you a co-host, and if you can, that would be great if you could help with that.
Yeah, I was having a tough time even on mine finding out how to do it. So
okay, all right. Well,
I may have an older version of Zoom or something, because in the bottom I could see participants, but I couldn't see the breakout rooms.
if we have anybody who's tech savvy and wants to help distribute people when we go to the next breakout room, that would be great. Let me know.
I'll try.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Is Wes Brown still available? I had a question for him. Maybe I'll just put it in chat.
Tom, one other thing you may want to do is while one of the speakers is speaking, to actively look at people who have their microphones on and just automatically mute them in the participant list. Because there was some.
You got some feedback?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I
No, that's
was
okay.
looking. It's a little bit of hunt and peck to find them.
I think usually they pop up to the top. So anybody who has their microphone on, their name should pop up to the top usually.
Okay.
Did somebody say the word Wes Brown? I was.
Fred.
Yes. Yeah, that was me. Hi, Wes.
I'm back from coffee break.
Okay. I did see a notice that you're going to be heading the IMCOS meeting in Texas.
Well, I'm the one assigned by IMCOT. I have a new duty to be their representative on all the international symposia. So I'm their representative working with the Texas committee for that.
My one question is, what have you chosen a city?
It's going to be at UT Arlington between Fort Worth and Dallas. And then there'll be little visits to wonderful museums and things during those 4 days. Apparently we're going to some spectacular wealthy ranch outside of Dallas where the guy has a huge collection and nobody can ever go see it. And they're all really excited about that. And then there's going to be a 4-day excursion for visiting persons to Texas after the conference.
Well, I've been a member of IMCOS for several years and never been to a meeting. But I think I convinced Walter Schwartz that that's a great opportunity for the two of us to go to an IMCOS meeting. His daughter works in Texas, so that looks like a great opportunity for us.
Will they have a virtual barbecue?
They're going to go. They've got some fantastic cowboyish things planned as part of the show and tell. That's what's so fun. The lectures are in the morning, and then there's excursions in the afternoon, and they've got a bunch of really amazing things for us to do.
Great. Congratulations, by the way, on the position. That's good.
Hi, Wes.
Ron, my 93-year-old mother loves your book.
Oh, Wes, I was just about to ask how the family is out in Sacramento.
Wes, when is the MCOS meeting in Texas?
So the meeting this fall will be in Brussels. In 2022 in the fall, first week of October, it will be in Texas.
Okay.
2022.
Where in Texas will it be, Wes?
Yeah, it'll be based at UT Arlington, University of Texas at Arlington, where they have that wonderful map center.
Yeah.
And then, you know, people will be some in Dallas and Fort Worth and so forth.
Wes, what are the dates for the Brussels meeting? What month?
It's like October of this year, and they're hoping that it will work out.
Okay, we'll try to get our vaccines all lined up.
It's October 11th to 14th.
Thanks, John.
I think the 2022 meeting in Texas might be linked with the Texas Map Society and the Garrett Lectures. That would be a good combination for them.
Do they have the exact dates for 2022 or just?
No, that's just a guess because that's typically a time in early October when they meet and the Garrett Lectures are.
It'll be October 6th through 9th, but that's still in development. It's not, it hasn't been published yet, but we're still trying to get the venues lined up and everything, but that's probably what it will be.
October, okay.
Julie, how do I send a message? I'm just sending a message to Juliet Sweetkind, but I get it, but I don't know how to send it.
Wait,
Go to chat. Down the bottom, click on chat.
Where?
Chat.
Go to chat.
That's what I did.
Oh, wait. What did you do?
Oh, jeez. Oh.
Go back to open Zoom meeting. Open Zoom meeting.
No, on the screen. Look at the screen. Move your cursor.
No, he's got it on chat, but he's sending it to everyone.
No, I'm sending it to Juliet Sweetkind Singer.
No.
Okay, this to everyone. Just click on that and then you can pick out the person.
Oh, I see. There she is.
Oh God, why didn't it go? Now it's all out of order. Here we go. But I clicked on it. And
Here she is.
Hey, Tom, I wanted to say that the CMS might not gather until after our landing. To make a press for everybody wishing us luck for our landing on the 18th.
Okay, I don't know what you did.
Don't worry about it. Second time I couldn't do it.
Because you have to do, it won't let me because you already wrote this.
All right. So welcome back from the break. Hopefully everybody's back, and if not, we'll let people trickle in, but I think I'll go ahead and get started. So let me share my screen. And so I'm Mike Shembry, and I'm going to be presenting, just basically going through an example of using ArcGIS to create a map. And so the idea here is just to show how easy it is to kind of pull data together and create a map of your own. I'm going to be using ArcGIS Online, so you don't need to install any software for this. And I'm going to be pulling data from their Living Atlas, which is kind of this treasure trove of data sources that you can pull from and combine data to create a map. If you're not familiar with GIS, GIS stands for Graphical Information System, and it basically consists of laying down a base map, and then on top of that, adding layers of additional data or maps. They can be bitmap type data, or they can be vector data, and you can make them transparent so you can see through layers and actually combine data from multiple sources. The example I'm going to go through is after the advent of COVID, I was thinking, everything has moved online and there's sort of this digital divide issue. So wondering in the Bay Area where we have a lot of technology, whether there's really that many people left that do not have internet access and are maybe left out of this digital revolution. So to do that, I'm going to pull data from the US Census. They have the American Community Survey. And within that, they describe the % of households with internet connectivity. And then I'm also going to pull in some data on median household income to see if maybe there's an association and the two are possibly related. So I'm going to try to do this as a demo. Let's see here. So here I'm going to start off on the ArcGIS online webpage. So this is the webpage you would log into. I've already logged into my account. I click to start a map. I click on the map menu or option at the top. And ArcGIS starts off by creating a blank map of the United States. You can see, and on the left-hand side, it gives you there's an About tab that actually gives you some step-by-step instructions on creating your map. To start my map, I'm going to zoom in on the Bay Area, which is my kind of area of interest right now for this particular map. And then right now I have a topographical map. I'm going to change my base map. Rather than this kind of topographical map, I'm going to use a light gray canvas. And that's because I'm doing a data map here and I'm not really so interested in the topography for this particular map. So I have my base map laid out. To add content to that, I'm going to come up to the Add menu and go to the Living Atlas Layers. And then in the Living Atlas Layers, there's tons of stuff in here. I'm going to look for the ACS, which is the American Community Survey, and I'm going to look for internet variables. There's actually a couple options here. I'm going to choose the second one here, which is a centroid map, and basically it creates dots that have color shading that reflect the amount of internet connectivity. And so I'm going to click on Add Map. And with that, ArcGIS will bring the data into my map and populate my map with the data points. And you can see here we have census tract level data that's describing with dots the level of internet connectivity, where the dark purple looks like is low connectivity. On the left, in the content tab or panel here, you can see that it actually brought in 3 different layers, one for state data, one for county data, and one for tract level data. And as I zoom out, if I zoom out enough, it'll actually automatically select the correct one. So if I zoom out enough, it'll show county level summaries. And then if I zoom out more, it'll show state level summaries. Let's take a look at the legend, see what we're looking at. It looks like the dark purple represents 25% or more of households in those census tracts do not have internet connectivity. That seems a little, I mean, that's more than I was expecting. I was not expecting in the Bay Area, this many census tracts to have low connectivity, but that still means in those ones, there's 75% of households do have connectivity. So I'm going to make a change to that and make that a little bit more conservative. If I come to my census tract level map, there's some options down here I can modify. I'm going to select the map style options. In the map style, step 1 allows me to actually select other variables. There's actually a whole list of variables. I can look at cell phone use and smartphones and computer access. I'm going to stick with the internet activity for this, but I'm going to change the default option here for the display. So I'm going to stick with the dots. I'm going to stick with the counts and amounts display, but this will take me to my actual legend, what my scale is, and I'm going to change the scale to up to be 40%. And so now if I save that and come back to my map, you can see my map's a little bit less dramatic. I don't have so much dark purple there, and the scale is actually showing the dark purple as being 40% or more. So I still have census tracts though where 40% or more of the households do not have internet connectivity. So it still actually shows some extreme tracts there. The other thing I wanted to bring in to see whether this is really a function of possibly of household income, I'm going to bring in some household income data. So I'm going to, again, go to Browse Living Atlas Layers, and I'm going to search for ACS income. And here I'm going to, again, use the ACS map. This time I'm going to use the boundary map, which fills in the entire census tract boundary. Again, here's a description of the map, and add that to map. So now I have my income data. It occluded my dots, and so I could make this layer transparent to be able to see through it, to see the dots as well, but probably the smarter thing is to change the order of the maps. So I'm going to come back here and actually just grab a handle here and drag these, change the order that these maps are displayed so that the dots show up on top. And now I can actually view both data points at the same time and be able to tell, look at whether there's a, seems like there's association between the two variables. It looks like, there probably is, where a lot of the census tracts that have low connectivity also are lower median household income. And if I go to my legend, you can see the dark purple in income is less than 29,000. the green is greater than 96,000. So that's my map, pretty easy to put together. We can zoom out from this, obviously, and look at the United States. And if we zoom out far enough, as I said, it will look at here I'm looking at county level data. Oh, I think the order of the maps. So this is only showing so I have to change the order of these. And so now it's showing both the internet connectivity as well as the income. And you can see across the country, this is the back to the 20%. Dark purple, but still you can see across the country there's quite a bit, certainly much more than I was expecting of counties that have more than 25% of households that do not have internet connectivity. So definitely a lot of people not, with connectivity and possibly left out of this kind of use of digital technology. So that's my map. I can save it here. If I save it, it does require that I give it some tags. So I'm going to give it internet and income. And so it has something to search on later on. I can save that map. And then just in terms of navigating here, I go to the content tab, and that's where I can find previous maps that I have created. And the other thing I really want to show here is from the content tab, you can go to the Living Atlas. And this is the place where you can really browse the Living Atlas and explore all the different kinds of data sources. I did a data map. You don't have to do a data map. There's lots of geography data in here you can do. You can plot the recent wildfires. There's event data. It'll automatically update event data. There's a ton of stuff to explore in here. But this gives you a place you can actually look around and try to explore some of that. So back to just a couple more slides. These are kind of examples of the source data. On the left-hand side are some of the sources. Most of these are federal agencies, but Esri, the company that makes ArcGIS, actually creates a lot of this data source. There's census data, U.S. forestry data, and it ranges from environmental data, climate change data, demographic data, political data, all sorts of, whatever your topic is of interest, there's probably something in here you might find interesting. Just a few to wrap up, just a few caveats, especially with these data maps, they can be very compelling and dramatic. And when you combine data and do any kind of data analysis, you always want to be cautious. Make sure you attend to the scale and know what what the shadings mean, know what your variables that you're pulling in, and what assumptions might underlie them. And then always think about the unit of analysis. Everything we looked at here was census tract level. So we were looking at associations within census tract, not household associations, level associations. This is all observational data. So we can't really determine causation per se, but really rich observational data. And then always when you're doing a map, consider why you're doing the map, what you expect to find, how you'll interpret it, and then always be thoughtful about what biases you might bring to the interpretation. So I will stop there, and I think that finishes us up.
That's great, Mike. Thank you so much. That was really good. So you do have a couple of questions here in the chat. Louise asked, is ArcGIS Online a subscription service to which I could subscribe? No one's.
It is a subscription service. I think I'm paying $100 a year. They do have a free trial though, so you get, I forget if it's 2 or 3 weeks, you can try it out before you buy it. So.
Cherie asked if there's data for Alaska.
I'm sure there's a lot of data for Alaska. I don't know particularly, but I would encourage you to look in there and look for it. And I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Ron Gibbs asked, how big is a census tract, say compared with a zip code? Is there a heterogeneity within a census tract?
So the census tracts are one of the smallest units. And so they are, I don't know exactly how many people are in it, but they're meant to be relatively consistent size. They are generally smaller than zip codes. Zip codes are larger, and they don't fall within zip codes. They ignore zip code boundaries, and just the census does its own, plotting of what the census tract should be. They try to be a consistent size. I don't know off the top of my head what that is, but they are one of those. Do you know, Tom?
Yeah, I think there's about 77,000 census tracts in America. So I think that works out to, I think that's about 3,000 people per census tract. The smaller grain size is called a block group, and there's 220,000 of those in America.
But yeah, we probably won't get block group data.
Mike, this is Ron. So the reason I was asking is that we were trying to look at disparities in health, particularly with regard to COVID, by zip code. And zip codes in California are very heterogeneous.
Sure, yes, they are.
Heterogeneous. So it's nice to know this census tracts are smaller and more homogeneous.
And they actually have a COVID site that kind of has a collection of all their COVID data sources. So there's a lot to explore with COVID if that's your interest. I think we're out of time, so I think we'll wrap it up and maybe go to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Ken Habib, and he is the Secretary and Director of the California Map Society. And today he's going to be sharing with us 18th century Africa maps.
Hi all. Yeah, I'm going to talk about some African maps. I got interested. One day I saw a large map by, an African map by Blau in it, and PBA auctions house in San Francisco, when it was still in San Francisco, sitting next to Michael Jennings, who was looking at a San Francisco map. That's where I met Michael. In fact, that was about 5 years ago, and I was stunned by the quality, the size and the quality and of that particular map. So anyway, since then I purchased maybe a baker's dozen of African continent maps, and only a few of which I will put in front of you, but some others to fill in the story around the exploration and colonization of Africa. Some of these maps, some of the other maps being pretty well known. I'll drop a bunch of names, but you don't have to get too caught up in the names. It's mostly the thrust of history, I guess you could say. So I want to show the blanket map first, Tom. Okay, there it is. Yeah, the mapping of the African coastline, not the interior, had begun as early as the 14th century, first by Catalans and then by the Portuguese during the so-called Age of Discovery. Their forays are delineated in portolan charts, because the Portuguese had heard of vast wealth and trade opportunities in Asia, they looked to explore and find out how to get to that, and they initially tried to reach Asia via North African land routes. There they were stymied by Islamic commercial and military strongholds. This later Nicholas Blankert map that you're looking at of 1652 in my collection oddly shows what was known about the continent before any ocean exploration, which was only North Africa, although that wasn't Blankert's particular intent, but you can see that there's almost nothing below North Africa in terms of cities or kingdoms or anything. With the development of a maneuverable ship, though, called the Caravel, Portuguese mariners attempted reconnaissance of the North African coastline. You can see them in this bird's eye view map of the island of Ischia by William Blau. That's the next map. You can see those, them coming down the coast line of Italy there. By the mid-1400s, the Portuguese reached and dominated an area called Mauritania on the northwest African coast. That's the Blau West Africa map. Mike?
Hold on. This one?
Yeah, well, that will do. Yes, that's it probably. And you can see on the northwest side there, let's see.
Was it this one?
No, it's actually the last one.
Okay.
And at the upper, the far left, there's an area right there. Yeah, right where you're right there. That's Mauritania. Anyway, the Portuguese reached and dominated Mauritania, and whether they were offered human chattel in trade by their West African counterparts or they initiated it, Mauritania provided the start of the Atlantic slave trade. The interesting thing is that slaves have been out, in the world for centuries, long before this map was created.
Did you want me to go to the slave trade map?
Sure, yeah, we could do that. But it was never a matter of race early on. So before the 14th century, before the Portuguese started their business, as it were, It was not a factor. Race was not much of a factor. It was more about subjugation. The Portuguese sort of made it into a race issue when they reached Africa and Mauritania in particular. And they, by the way, ran with it. They were very systematic once they realized the value in that trade. They ended up setting up a colony on the Cape Verde Islands, which was about 350 miles off of Mauritania, and used them as a staging point for transportation of their newest product. You can show that.
Which one is that? Hold on.
That would be, yes, that's the one right there. That's Santiago, the main port city in Mauritania, or rather in the Cape Verde Islands. And it would eventually become one of the wealthiest cities in the Portuguese Empire, just because of the burgeoning slave trade. But the opportunistic Portuguese ventures did not stop there. Still pursuing trade opportunities in Asia, the mariners bounced from one viable port to another down the West African coastline until eventually Vasco da Gama, a name a lot of you have heard, successfully rounded the Horn of Africa and found a sea route to trade-rich India. And for at least 100 years after that, notwithstanding or in addition to the human industry in Mauritania, the African coast was actually viewed mainly as a route to trade in India and Asia. Inland Africa was nearly untouched, the exception being some penetration of the Congo by Portuguese priests and soldiers, but it was a huge mystery. During this period when today's Italy was comprised of kingdoms, duchies, and city-states, the Venetians were the first to try and get the mapping of the continent right using what scant information they could get their hands on via Portuguese texts. The Venetians began with woodcut maps, often with bird's eye views and symbols of topographic features. That would be the, let's see. I haven't gotten to that map yet. Anyway, you can remember the bird's eye view in the Ischia map. I guess we didn't show the Ischia map. Oh, yes, we did. The bird's eye view in the Ischia map by William Blau showed that earlier. That was a style that the Venetians began. Now, I am amazed by the effort of one underappreciated Venetian. He was an early 16th century cartographer by the name of Giacomo Castaldi. Not a lot of people have heard of him. He produced a map of Africa that is amazingly close to the continent's actual shape. So you can look at that. And now if we can show the satellite view, Tom, you can see how close he came in the 16th century. Quite amazing. Wow. Maybe it helped that Castaldi was an engineer and an astronomer. He had a scientific outlook about him, I reckon. And I want to, I actually would like to put that up against a map by another well-known German cartographer by the name of Sebastian Munster. You can show this, you can see the difference between Castaldi's map and Munster's. These are they are contemporaneous maps. They were produced at about the same time, within probably 20 years of each other. Here's another map by Fratelli. This is a 1790 map by Castaldi's countryman, Bordigo Fratelli. I assume this was a Dutch knockoff when I bought it. I didn't know at the time that Fratelli was following in a long tradition of Italian map makers, which included Forlani and Cornelli. A lot of people have heard of the name Cornelli. He was a big hitter in Italian cartography. The 16th century saw spreading European interest in the African continent, mostly because of the slave trade now. We could show a picture, Tom, of the Elmira Castle, if you can find that one. It's a very famous castle that that the slave trade now began to move in and out through. It was run by the Dutch at first, and then I think, or maybe the Portuguese and then the Dutch, but millions of slaves came through that castle. Now we enter the Age of Enlightenment, and the Dutch, behind their growing fleet of ships, had also by this time become the dominant force in cartography. Notable maps of the continent were made by Willem Blauw, Jodocus Hondius, John Speed, the Englishman, Gerard Mercator, and Abraham Ortelius, named the most well-known. There were others of note, of course. Here's the Ortelius map. You can see at that time he was dazzling people with creatures and also animals within the continent to keep interest, and because they didn't know a lot about the area then, and I mean, even the seas were a mystery. As other people have explained, they imagined a lot of things, and even when they didn't imagine them, they left them in. So Ortiz Map of Africa borrows from, there's some details from, and you can see why Ortelius sold a lot of maps. They're beautiful and very fascinating.
Ken, you got about a minute left, just to let you know.
Okay. Ortiz Map of Africa borrows from Castaldi, but he also made some corrections, especially for rivers in the interior like the Niger, whose origin and endpoint would become kind of the holy grail in the 19th century for many intrepid explorers, beginning with Scotsman Mungo Park, Bain U. Clapperton, Rennie Cayley, Richard Francis Burton, John Hanning Speke, George Schweinfurth, and Henry Morton Stanley, a name that most of you guys have heard before. I've got a lot more, but I can talk about it in the chat room. By the way, does anyone, I'll ask this one last question, does anyone know who engraved the 16th century Ortelius map? The engraver. That would be the young Franz Hogenberg of the famous cartograph duo Brown and Hogenberg.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ken. So I think we don't quite have enough time for questions for this one. So if you could join the breakout room and bring up questions then, perhaps we can move on to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Susan Powell, and she comes to us from UC Berkeley. She's the GIS and map librarian there, and she is going to be presenting maps captured from the German military during World War II.
All right. Oops. Quick, that was a preview of what's to come. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you all today. Again, my name is Susan Powell. I'm the GIS and Maps librarian at UC Berkeley, and I'm going to be talking today about a German World War II captured maps collection that we've been working on analyzing, upgrading the cataloging, and digitizing. And my colleague Heiko Muir is also here with us on the call this morning, and he and I have just written a paper that's also been submitted for peer review, which we're excited about. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that. So just a quick overview of the collection that we're talking about. The Army Map Service distributed maps following World War II. So we heard from Julie Sweetkind-Singer earlier this morning about the map, some about that distribution program where they were distributing maps that the Army Map Service was creating. They also distributed maps that had been captured from enemy militaries during the end of World War II and following the close of World War II. So we believe there are about 35 libraries that received those captured maps. So a much smaller number than were receiving maps from through the normal depository program. And largely those maps have been somewhat understudied and unanalyzed in library collections around the US historically for a number of reasons. In part because of the language barriers, they're a little bit harder to understand than the AMS maps. And there may have been some fear that the maps would kind of be put together and demanded back. So there was some anxiety about that. But UC Berkeley received maps through this program, and about 21,000 probably is what we estimate in the collection. But because of that kind of integration with other maps in the collection, we haven't been exactly sure which maps were received through that depository program. So in late 2017, the UC Berkeley Library began a project to analyze and identify the maps that were in our collection from the Captured Maps program. And that was in part spurred on by a donation from UC Riverside, where their library was going through a renovation and needed to downsize their physical map collection. And the librarian there, Janet Reyes, offered those maps to the Berkeley collection, and we started integrating them. So as of March 2020, which as we all know is kind of like the great shutdown, we had analyzed and cataloged and scanned about 10,000 maps of that collection. And so we're about halfway through. Just quickly, the amount of overlap that we've seen with the Riverside collection so far has been about 92%, but that varies widely. So there's some sets that Riverside has that we don't have at all, and vice versa. So we created a map website guide to help give access to some of to the maps that we've scanned. And I encourage you to go and explore it. The map series range in size from just a few maps to several thousand. So accessing them indexes are helpful for that. And we've also put together a small reading list to help orient users to the maps, and talked about kind of the process behind the collection. And I should say the geography scope ranges is mostly Europe, but also includes some pieces of North Africa and Central Asia. And the scale ranges from 1 to 25,000 all the way up to 1 to 1 million into the much smaller scales. So this kind of website is an access point to the actual map scans, and the map scans appear in the Berkeley Library digital collection site. And those, again, we kind of encourage you to explore through the interactive map viewer. You can zoom way in on the maps and get really nice detail. All of the maps are also available for download through the website. So you can download them and explore them on your own devices. And I wanted to, this is some more information about what appears on the library digital collection site page. So the part of the project was really taking a good look at the cataloging records, the way that we had described these maps in our catalogs. All of the maps in Berkeley's collection were cataloged, but they also hadn't been extensively cataloged. So the minimal, I'd say minimal records. And HICO has done a lot of work to add lots of additional information about source materials, the different bodies, corporate bodies that were involved in the making of the maps. Because it really was, I think this got mentioned in the breakout room earlier, but the German kind of state of mapping at the beginning of their war of aggression. Sorry, there's a parade of motorcycles going by my house right now, so you might hear some background noise. It was a kind of a federalist state, and so the mapping program was also not centralized. And you can see the change in the mapping style of the German military throughout the course of the war. So I wanted to end with really focusing in on one map in particular. This is an example from a set of France that covers France at 1 to 25,000. And this sheet in particular is up near the coast in Brittany and was produced in 1943. So if we zoom in a little bit, we can see some interesting things about this map. And not, I will say not all of the maps in the collection are quite this interesting, but there are, you know, when you have 20,000 maps, you're bound to get some interesting ones. So these were used in the field, and this map has hand annotations with cultural landmarks like churches, chapels, stone crosses, and the TP references that you see are referring to trigonometric points. So this map was updated by the German military, and then as the course of the war continued, they needed increased information and increased accuracy. So they were continuing to upgrade the maps. The other interesting thing about this is that you'll see there are two really distinct styles of mapping that we're seeing on this one map. The kind of cleaner looking, more modern version at the top of the map is the updated German mapping that used, had ground checks and had aerial photography to check and ground truth the older mapping that it was based on. So it was based on older maps that the French had produced, and then the Germans had updated it, but you can see they hadn't quite gotten to update all it. So this little inset diagram is printed in the margin of the map, and it shows when the aerial photography was taken and flown that is the basis for the updated mapping that we see on the other portions of the map. And this was, this was published as a new edition under the Deutsche Heereskarte, which is the series, that kind of designation that began to be used around 1942. And it meant that the Germans had kind of updated the mapping information enough that they were comfortable with it as a kind of uniform set. And the older portion of this map hasn't been updated yet. So the newer version you could use for directing artillery fire, for really kind of accurate military operations, whereas the portion that we see in the bottom left is really could be used for locating certain things, but it's not accurate enough for military operations. But they were so in need of accurate information for what they had that they went ahead and published the sheet. So I want to encourage you to explore more. As I said, we have about 10,000 maps that have been scanned and uploaded so far. And once we're able to get back into the office, we'll be working on getting the rest of the collection in there. And these are just a few of our some favorite snapshots from the maps. But
thank you.
I think that's
We have one question. Ed Franco is asking, were there any propaganda maps promoting Nazi ideology? What about mapping the Holocaust?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there definitely were those produced. I think the maps that we see in the Berkeley collection and in the Captured Maps collection in general were more used by the military for operations and planning, and less about the ideological persuasion. But and I'm not an expert on that area, but I know that the Germans were actively producing kind of the more ideological maps as well. Absolutely. And most of what we have is also these topographic maps, but they were producing other kinds of maps that were of use kind of in planning. So you see some resource inventories, there's census maps. So there are ones that are kind of informing the war effort in different ways than just on the ground troop information.
Great, thank you so much, Susan. That's wonderful. So I think we're about time to go to our second breakout session. That works.
All right, so we're going to go 15 minutes, and then when we come back, Susan Schulten will be next up. So I'm going to open up the rooms. Same process. Let me know where you want to go if you can't find your way into one, and and we will get it started. David Califon, I don't know if you know how to help with this, but I might need some assistance. All right, here we go. So who's left that wants to go to a room? I think the people may have been reassigned, Mike, to the prior room. So
Oh, okay.
I
yeah,
just
I got it.
I relabeled them. I
Oh,
hope that doesn't
okay.
cause problems. But
Yeah, I got into Susan Powell. So okay, I better let me see if I can join.
can you go back out and go to where you want to go? Ilion, Africa maps. Okay. Ed Franco, do you want to unmute yourself and I can put you into a room?
I just sent a chat saying Susan Powell, please.
Got it. Got it. Bill Eaton.
Yeah, something strange. I'm good. Let me try again.
James Jeffrey and Ken Habib asking for help.
Gonna try again here. Oh, let's get up. That's okay.
Tom, is it possible to go to the Africa maps one?
Yep. Sorry.
I think I just got automatically sent to the.
I know. I've got a learning that I just renamed the rooms, and I think that pushed everybody back to where they had started. So I learned. Sorry about that. Okay. To Ken, right? Africa. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. There you go, James. All right, James, I'm going to take care of you here.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
No problem. I might have hit the wrong button.
No, you didn't. It was. So you're going to which one again?
Susan, please.
Yep.
Or Susan
Powell.
Powell's, yeah.
Yep.
Is Susan Shilton, are you already online?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Now I just managed to turn myself off.
I've been meaning to email
James,
you.
I'm not sure.
Oh,
I've been meaning to email you because, Susan, because something came across my desk that I think you'd be really interested in.
Oh.
And it's what the second ever issue of the Cherokee Asylum Orphan Press. So this is the Cherokee Nation who created an orphanage back in 1871. And the orphanage, instructed the children, and they purchased a printing press and taught the kids how to use it. And this is the kids' work that they've printed in this 4-page newspaper. It's very small, but it's fascinating. I'll send you the digital images to it.
Okay.
But I've been doing research, and there are only 2 or 3 known full examples of any issues of the Cherokee Orphan Press.
Oh, wow.
So it's really neat, because I know that you have some interest in Native American Indian material.
Yeah. And
It's
do
not
you
map
know-
related, it's not cartographic, but it's just kind of an interesting additional side piece.
Well, that's interesting, because in the 1830s, missionaries were teaching natives in Hawaii printing and using maps. And so this is exactly the same kind of thing, right? Teaching through engraving and mapping and printing especially. That's fascinating. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, it's got some great articles, that the kids wrote.
Mhm.
One wrote an article about winter, and another one wrote a little poem, and it's just really interesting kind of look at the Native American and Cherokee work that
Will
they
you
were.
auction it?
I think so.
Uh-huh.
Right now, I've kind of contacted a few institutions.
Mhm. I'm sorry, we're on
And-
recording, so you probably you may not want to talk about it.
But no, so it's supposed to be in our next auction. It is supposed to be, but I still have to confirm things with the consignor who sent it to me.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting. He bought some boxes of old papers from a few old family estates that they were just selling boxes of papers, and he's interested in that. And he looked through it, and this was one of the pieces. And the woman whose estate it was, she was a teacher. And so I wonder if she just she's a teacher, and she was in Indiana, so very far from Oklahoma. But it's really interesting to see how these things move around over time. And
Sure.
I'm not really sure how it ended up within her things. We haven't been able to determine that. She was a teacher, so that was maybe her interest in it. So.
Tom, just a quick question. I can control the PowerPoint myself, yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was confused watching the prior presentation, whether I had to submit it to you, and I'm
Nope.
back to that email.
Nope.
Thank you.
Yep. Did you not go skiing?
It's pretty bad. We don't have enough snow.
Oh,
we had-
really?
Actually, there was like 80-mile-an-hour winds, and Eldora shut down. A couple resorts shut down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's been really windy. Today's much calmer, but I'm hoping to go once the next storm comes through. We haven't had great snow.
Well, that's a bummer.
I know. I've been hiking a lot, just not a lot of skiing.
More exercise, maybe.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill Sawyers. How are you?
Tom, how are
Nice to
you?
Good, good.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Sawyers. I'm a friend and college classmate of Tom's, and he told me about this meeting today. So I thought I would listen in. I couldn't come to the beginning, but I definitely wanted to hear the keynote talk.
Well, thank you for joining, Bill. You came to the pop-up exhibit that I did in my office a year and a half ago or so.
I did. Wouldn't it be nice, and won't it be nice when we can do something like that again in person? That was very cool.
I did an exhibit, Ilion and Susan, with Jim Shine, who runs a map shop. I think he's closed his physical shop in North Beach, but we did a exhibit of 55 maps on the cartographic history of San Francisco. And it was a pop-up exhibit, and this was a precursor to the digital gallery. I'd gotten into collecting digital versions, and then I printed them all out onto poster boards, and then basically put up 55 maps in my office. And friends like Bill came by, and
it was very cool, and I learned a lot. And you got a lot of participation. How many people do you think showed up for that?
think we had 60 or 70.
Yeah,
something like
it
that.
was very cool. Yeah. Thank you again for doing
lot of
that.
fun. That presentation's sitting in a box in my office, waiting for the pandemic to go away. So
I think that will be a great celebration post-COVID when you can do that, when you can do that again, a pop-up again.
Please explain pop-up.
Let me see if I can show you pop-up. Pop-up basically means a digital, like a map on a poster board on an easel, and then 50 of them scattered around my my office.
I think pop-up started with stores and food things where it wasn't a permanent exhibit or it wasn't a permanent outline. It was like, hey, for a week, we're going to be here. Come look at this or come see this. It was a pop-up and then it was going to go away again. So I don't know where it was first used. Be interesting to look at the etymology of that, but it's a temporary exhibit or a temporary business. It pops up and then it pops back down again.
I'm having a hard time finding the picture. Here we go. I found it. So these were some of the, I don't know if you can see this, Jim. You're maybe muted, Jim.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I can see it.
There's Jim. Anyway, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's the 5 California maps, Devogany, if I'm pronouncing it.
Yeah.
If I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah.
That's blown up. That's blown up. That's not an original size, is it?
No.
If it is, I'll buy it. I'm sorry to hear no more bricks and mortars, but he gave a presentation, of course, at San Francisco Library.
Yeah.
When we were live 3-ish years ago. And of course, he's very knowledgeable and a really great guy. So I hope them and their dogs are doing well.
They moved to Sonoma.
Well, so they had a shop in Sonoma. I didn't know that they had actually moved there, but okay. Good to know that they're safe in a rural area, safer in a rural area.
So these are all most of the maps. I have to tweak on this a little bit, but here's the Devogany online.
Yeah.
And so all of these were the maps that were in the exhibit for the most part.
Where's San Francisco on that map?
Yeah, good question. Let's see if we can find it.
It's not.
All right, we are going to close the rooms down here momentarily.
Boy, this is beautiful.
This is one of my favorites.
Peruse, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Jim Shine called this the map of the 7 rabbits.
And oh. Boy, that's Freud. That's Freudian for you, or that's Rorschach for you.
Yeah.
Oh. That's
That was Humboldt.
Dallas. No, oh, that's Humboldt. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Which I don't have. And that's, whoa, what's that? That's oh,
Beachy.
who?
Beachy?
What year is, oh, that's
1833.
Oh, is he English? That's
I think he's
gorgeous.
British.
Well,
I think
okay,
he's
we'll say to some people that's the same thing. That's gorgeous.
Isn't that lovely? Love these views.
Oh, wow. Well, and that's of course, well, not Fremont, but that's the Senate, or that's the Senate version.
Right. You're good, man.
And that's oh God, I know what it is. There's so many of those that I got it mixed up. Whose is?
This is Larkin.
Oh yeah, that's, oh, I know why I don't recognize it, because that's worth about $1.6 million, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a $10,000 map, if I'm not mistaken, or more.
Tom, should we?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you want to introduce Susan?
Yep. Let me. Is everybody back?
I think we're back.
All right.
That's fine.
All right. Hold on. I'm going to stop. Actually, I'm going to do one thing here. Okay. Give me just a second. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So I'm delighted to be able to introduce Susan Schulten. In my kitchen at home, atop a pile of books that my family knows not to touch, is a dog-eared and highly annotated copy of her book, America in 100 Maps. Susan, your book gave me 3 months of lunchtime reads during this now 10-month pandemic, so thank you very much for that. And in the midst of all of our political craziness, I reached out to Susan to see if she knew anyone who might speak about gerrymandering, one of the subjects in her book. And she offered me a couple of names of modern experts, but then added, if I wanted to hear about the historical context of gerrymandering, she would be happy to, at that time, interrupt her ski vacation to present to our group. Well, here she is, unfortunately not fresh off the slopes because they don't have snow, but professor of history at the University of Denver, a graduate of Cal Berkeley with a PhD from UPenn, Susan Schulten. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Bay Area Map Group for having me. This is my first time visiting your meeting. And of course, in this age, one silver lining is that we all get to join everybody's meeting all the time. So, I really appreciate Tom's invitation. It's so wonderful to see so many friends on the call. Many of you have been so important to me, and I want to especially acknowledge that I am not an expert in gerrymandering, but there is someone on the call who is, and that person is Mark Monmoner, who has been a hero of mine for 25 years now, and who very kindly, when I was a graduate student, answered my letters before we had email, when I wrote to him and asked him for guidance about the kind of work I was interested in at the time, around 20th century World War II maps. So I really want to acknowledge how much Mark has meant to me over the years. And many of you who have helped me through the trade and through universities, Ron Grimm, Eliane Dotson, Julie Sweetkin-Singer, sorry. And I do want to say to Susan Powell how wonderful that collection is. I can't wait to tell some of my seniors who are interested in mapping World War II about that resource. So thank you very much. I'm going to speak very briefly about some maps that show us the history of gerrymandering. I've been told to keep it brief. I know you've had a long morning. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and show you a few interesting maps.
Yeah, and Susan, just to, you've got a good 20 minutes, right, Mike?
20 minutes to cover 300 years, right?
Well,
no, I'm teasing. But here we go. Now, the moment that we're in today is even more fraught than when Tom called me several weeks ago. Many of you have lamented the political polarization that we're facing now. The only thing I can tell you is that this is endemic to representative democracy, but the polarization that we're experiencing right now is made even worse by the increasing sophistication of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering makes all races less competitive, and we have seen the rather horrifying upshot of that, where In some extreme situations, representatives can actually determine their voters as opposed to the reverse. I wanted to show you just a few historical examples that might give you a sense of the through lines of gerrymandering. We're in a new era now, especially as Mark Monmoner has argued with electronic mapping and algorithms. I'm going to show you the sort of analog history of all this. But despite the technological advances, we're still talking about essentially the same thing, which is the manipulation of lines for the purpose of ensuring homogeneity and victory. Any representative democracy depends upon districts. The only exception, of course, is the idea of at-large voting, which has not been the case in the United States for a very, very long time. Essentially was done away with in 1842. But if you're going to have representative districts, you have to draw the line somewhere. And that's where districting, redistricting manipulation comes in. Now, this goes back to the origin of the republic itself. Many of you who've been paying attention to politics have thought about the history of fraught transitions between parties. And the most fraught of those, or the earliest of those transitions between parties at the executive level was in 1800. When John Adams conceded after a very protracted tabulation period to Thomas Jefferson. Now, the reason that's important is it was a handoff not just between two men in the executive, but between two parties. Jefferson's subsequent two terms were highly partisan. This is the story of American political exchanges in the early 19th century. In fact, political parties are themselves the outgrowth of the divisions in politics in the 1790s. And so once Jefferson's term reaches an end, we're also looking at a census of 1810. Those two things coincide, and that's where I want to begin. The Federalists in Massachusetts had controlled politics throughout that state's history. They had deep disdain for Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. And in 1811, the Jeffersonian Republicans managed to wrest control away from the Federalists and elect a Republican governor, Elbridge Gerry, G-E-R-R-Y. He became the governor of Massachusetts. Like I said, that victory of a Republican in Massachusetts coincided with the 1810 census, which allowed the Republicans who had won control of the state house itself to redraw the boundaries for subsequent elections. And they do that, and they manage to do very well in redrawing those boundaries. In the subsequent election, the Republicans managed to elect more representatives to the state house than the Federalists for the second time. And that drove them to double down on using any electoral edge they could. When they redraw those boundaries, the governor, Gerry, signs off on that. And that's really important. Elbridge Gerry signs off on those Republican-controlled districts. And the ones I want to show you and draw special attention to showed up in the Federalist newspaper, the Boston Gazette, which was controlled by Federalist Benjamin Russell, in March of 1812. And I apologize if your strip of little thumbnails is cutting it off, but the map I want you to pay attention to is here on the right, the one of Essex County, which drew a lot of scrutiny in the aftermath of that. The Federalists found Essex County particularly galling because it managed to connect the Republicans around the perimeter of Essex County and to concentrate the Federalists in the interior. And that gambit paid off. In the next election, with even fewer votes than the Federalists, the Republicans managed to elect more representatives. In other words, redistricting worked here. And in the next several weeks, the engraver and painter Elkanah Tisdale, designed an image that took advantage of the Essex County map and tried to satirize it in a comic sort of way. He reproduces it using 4 woodblocks that are actually in the Library of Congress. I don't know if Ron Grimm wants to say anything about that during the Q&A. And those eventually morphed into a political cartoon with claws and wings and a dragon head that I'll show you in just a minute. That is published in the Boston Gazette in a few weeks after this one was published in the Boston Gazette, pardon me, in the same paper, and satirized the Republican techniques of redistricting. Now, as the story goes, there was a dinner party populated by Federalists, and someone looked at the map of Essex County and says, well, that's so strange. It looks like a salamander. And someone else says, no, it's even stranger than that. It's a gerrymander, satirizing not just the governor in terms of his politics on signing off on that, but also satirizing him in a different way that I'll show you in just a second. This is the image from the Salem Gazette, which reproduced the Boston Gazette map, the Tisdale map, courtesy of PJ Mode and Persuasive Maps at Cornell. And it's accompanied by a very exuberant and dramatic attack by the Federalists on the Republicans for their manipulation. And if you read it, you cannot but pay attention and notice how similar some of our rhetoric is today, which is the feeling that what gerrymandering does is to stifle the majority, in the words of the Federalists. I'm going to zoom in even further because there's some nice little details on this, but what it's essentially done is to take that Essex map and to highlight the Republican districts that were connected and contiguous, but in a highly strange way. And I've turned it 90 degrees here so you can see that it's not just, of course, a dragon, but if you look more closely, you can see here at left, it's satirized Jerry's profile. There's his hook nose, right? There's his chin. So it's permanently attached him to this thing. Redistricting becomes known in a shorthand way as gerrymandering. This poor man who was a deep patriot and lover of the country, who had sterling credentials in political realms, but was forever connected with this idea that the opposition, it's never one's own, right, party, it's always the opposition that is manipulating districts. Now, to fast forward here, I want to show you just a slightly different tack. This is what's called packing, right? That is to say, they're packing the opposition into the interior here to minimize its representative power. But there's a companion technique, which is known as cracking. Many of you know this. In the aftermath of the American Civil War, and especially after the collapse of Reconstruction, African Americans were subject to terrible methods of disfranchisement, some of them perfectly legal, poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, constitutional tests, but some of them quite violent, right? The use of the Klan, the use of the White League, assassination, intimidation, those kinds of tactics. The goal was to minimize the Black male vote that had been guaranteed under the 15th Amendment. And essentially by the 1890s, that had worked in many, many ways. But I draw your attention here to a redistricting map from Alabama in 1894. And the reason it's interesting to me is that this is a moment in the 1890s when poor white and Black sharecroppers are beginning to align in very, very preliminary ways around populist candidates. In other words, white poor sharecroppers are not necessarily being loyal or consistently voting for the Democratic Party, which dominated the American South, but instead beginning to defect and vote for populists. Some African Americans had signaled their support for that as well. And so what the state legislature of Alabama does after the census of 1890 is to use its Democratic dominated power to draw those new district lines in order to take that African American population here along the Cotton Belt and to crack it. And you can see that each one of these districts takes a piece of that African American vote in order to dilute the African American vote and to prevent it from exerting its singular power, because a significant proportion of Alabama was African American. This is a legacy, of course, of slavery. So we've got packing in the first instance and cracking in the second instance. Now, the repression of the African-American vote in the South is pretty complete by about 1900 or 1910. In other words, white Democrats simply don't have to worry about the African-American vote because African-American men and women in the aftermath of the 19th Amendment were completely disfranchised by a series of means. What you have is total dominance across the South, what we referred to when I was growing up as the solid South. That is challenged in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act, which protects very specifically African-American access to the ballot. And what you see in the aftermath of the Voting Rights Act is a doubling down on gerrymandering as a way of diluting the power of the African-American vote. One of the most extraordinary examples of that, and I couldn't find a good non-pixelated version of this, so I'll just describe it to you. But it's in the way it's the redistricting of the state capital of Mississippi, the city of Jackson, in 1973, as a way to get around the Voting Rights Act. The African-American population of Jackson was diluted into 5 separate districts, diluted in order to connect them to white-dominated districts if you go north and west. Away from Jackson, right? So this was a successful technique and a perfectly legal way to get around the Voting Rights Act. When the Voting Rights Act comes up for renewal in 1982, Congress tries to address this. And they do so with a phrase that becomes incredibly consequential. And I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially Congress says that minorities or protected classes have a right to elect representatives of their choice. This profoundly shapes electoral politics in subsequent years. Democrats begin to try to craft districts where minorities would constitute a majority. And that is part and parcel why we see some of the crazy gerrymandered districts that sometimes make the news. I'll give you one example of that. The most litigated state, I think, around gerrymandering is North Carolina. And what I'm showing you here is a series of maps that a geography student here at DU made for me for a history of America in 100 maps to try to capture what had happened to the 12th district in the state of North Carolina from 1993 to our own day. And so what she did very creatively was to sit with me and look at the different iterations of the 12th district in order to try to show readers, right, just how insane some of these districts are. At its craziest, you have it here at right, was the redistricting that happened in the early 1990s, what's sometimes referred to as the I-85 corridor map, a one that so creatively, you can see if you look very carefully that it is contiguous, but in some places it is no wider than the interstate itself. And the goal here is to connect Charlotte to Winston-Salem, to Greensboro, to Durham. And despite the craziness here, it had what some would consider a salubrious effect. For the first time in American history, the state of North Carolina elected an African-American to the House of Representatives. And so you have a kind of odd outcome of what had historically been a way to manipulate one's strength relative to the opposition. Chief Justice Sandra Day O'Connor looked at this, this first iteration of the 12th district, and she said it made her deeply, deeply uneasy because more than anything, it evoked the terrible era of Jim Crow. But she also recognized that in segregating African Americans, it was done in order to create a certain outcome that Congress itself had mandated with the amendment to the Voting Rights Act. And that is what creates a little bit of an irony here that sometimes we don't fully appreciate. In some ways, the current dilemma is that African Americans or other protected classes who benefit from some of these majority-minority districts that are gerrymandered are at odds with sometimes their own party. So in other words, this district here elected an African-American representative, but it also weakened the Democratic Party elsewhere. And so you have a different, an odd and slightly ironic alliance here between, in this case, African Americans and Republicans, who are only too happy to relegate some of these districts to minorities in order to maximize Republican strength elsewhere. And that's what I'll focus on in the last little inset here. In 2010, the Republicans won both houses of the North Carolina legislature. And as many of you know, you've lived through this. This was a pattern that was replicated throughout the South, so that the solid South of our youth, dominated by the Democratic Party, has now reversed. Of course, Georgia and that outcome 2 weeks ago may signal a slight reversal again. But for much of the late 20th and early 21st century, you see the South moving toward the Republican Party. Now, when the Republicans win control of both houses of the legislature in North Carolina in 2010, they are given the right, of course, to redistrict as they so choose based on the census of 2010. And what they did was to pack, as you see here, Democratic votes into 3 districts, including District 12 that you're looking at. It managed to reinforce Republican strength and further weaken the Democratic Party across North Carolina by both packing and diluting. Now, the map on the left may not look that different to you from the map on the right, but small tweaks produce really, really important political advantage. Republicans won less than 49% of the state vote in this election, but they took 9 out of 13 seats in the House of Representatives. And that trend, like I said, was replicated across the South. As the Republican Party gained control of state legislatures in the South, so too could they use this to their advantage. Now, like I said at the beginning, we all know, you know better than I do, how consequential this is. It has, everybody bemoans gerrymandering, right? But we also have blind spots as to who's doing it when. One thing I want to leave you with, and I know very little about this, but my son is a budding mathematician in college now. He's crazy about the uses of data. And his hero is a woman named Moon Duchin, who some of you know runs a lab out of the mathematics department at Tufts University. The name of the group is the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group. And what they do, they have a pretty clear political agenda, and that is to advance access to the ballot. They consider themselves advocates for civil rights. And they're trying to use new frontiers in mathematics to get to a deeper and fairer system. I don't know how they do that because my math skills are very primitive. But what I want to leave you with is just the irony here that the map is absolutely at the heart of gerrymandering. If you are interested in maps, this is one of the areas where the maps are the beginning and the end. Gerrymandering, redistricting simply cannot take place without a map. So the map has been part and parcel of how gerrymandering has worked over the last 200 years. And at the same time, the map might be the pathway forward if we think about new solutions. I'm going to close there. I want to respect people's time, but please, I'm happy to take questions or to make Mark Monmoner take questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. I'm sure there are questions, and if they're not, I'm going to jump in quickly.
Okay, I'd like to thank Susan for this, I think it was a very good historical review of gerrymandering. Obviously, I've been interested in some of the earliest maps showing the gerrymander in Massachusetts. But if I may, I'd like to do a little bit of advertisement for the joint map societies. We will be having a talk on Saturday, January, 30th. It's going to be a 2-hour talk on gerrymandering, and it's going to focus on the more modern techniques. And one of the speakers, Jeannie Clellan from the University of Colorado in Boulder, is a mathematician, and she will be talking about some of the mathematic aspects of developing gerrymander. So I welcome you all to that meeting.
Can you put something into the chat maybe with a link to that?
I'll try.
Maybe someone can find that.
I'm doing it right now, Ron. I'm putting the link in.
Okay, thanks, John.
Going in.
Mark.
Oh, that was an excellent talk, Susan. It's always nice when you learn something new. And believe it or not, this is the first time I recognized, and first time anybody pointed out, that Elbridge Gerry's profile was in the cartoon map. So thank you very much.
Susan, I was wondering about the Supreme Court cases. There have been a number of them. Can you provide any context to why they've been unable to identify or rein in this practice?
I can provide a little, and I welcome others' thoughts because there's just a whirlwind of cases. And as I was finishing A History of American 100 Maps, I was trying to do this essay last because the courts were handing down things week by week in 2018, early 2018 and to 2019. The big case, of course, is Common Cause versus Rucho. That's R-U-C-H-O, which I believe in 2018, correct? Essentially said, the Supreme Court essentially said, this is not our responsibility. The federal courts do not have governance or jurisdiction over what looked to be partisan and political problems. So essentially it kicked it back to the states. Now, some states have litigated this: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Maryland. And those, by the way, are both accusations against Democrats and Republicans. So this is being scrutinized in both parties, depending on which party dominates the state legislature. But there has been a flurry of cases about this, some of which say that these redistricting efforts at their worst violate the protection of free elections. So there has been, what they're using now, Tom, is referencing back to state constitutions. And most state constitutions have some kind of clause for free and fair elections. But you can bet that this will continue to be litigated.
Thank you.
If others want to weigh in, who know more about the litigation, I welcome that.
Other questions? Anything else in the, let's see, Edward Franco asks, has any other state followed the California method of redistricting to combat gerrymandering?
I assume Ed's referring to the commissions. Is that, I want to make sure.
That's correct.
Yes. Yes, I understand that that's kind of the gold standard now. I know that Colorado is looking at that. There's great interest within the state legislature of moving forward along those lines. And so I've heard it held up. But Ed, I don't actually know whether other states have adopted that.
I think Arizona has adopted it because I think the California initiative was somewhat modeled on Arizona.
I thought the gerrymander, that image is a great example of persuasive mapping. It has like real power, you know, and that always struck me. I mean, I always thought, you know, it explains a lot, you know, right there. And so, you know, of course, mapping is a rich visual tradition. It goes back thousands of years, but this image is clearly an example, you know, of the power of visual images.
Yeah, I'll put it back up just so folks can see real quick, because I agree, Heiko, that this is what gives it such enduring power, right? Is the way in which it's turned into, or anthropomorphized is not quite the right word, but I think you know what I'm getting at there. And I just have to express again my sympathy for poor Governor Gerry, because it's sort of a footnote, but the redistricting plan was repealed within a year. Because it came under such scrutiny, and partly because of these early newspaper maps. One thing I learned when looking at the wood blocks in Library of Congress was how difficult it was to create this map at all. It's 4 separate blocks. So the significant sort of time commitment here and expertise in terms of the history of map making is interesting as well.
Susan, I want to jump back to the present day. The recent results in 2020, this past month, in particularly in North Carolina and Georgia, let me isolate North Carolina for a second. I didn't really see what the results were there, but did they overcome the previous gerrymandering efforts by the vote, or did it actually succumb to the gerrymandering of earlier?
They were asked in 2019 to come up within a few weeks a new system. And so there's been back and forth. I believe that remains litigated. I believe the North Carolina legislature remains firmly in Republican control. And there's an enormous amount of money that's been poured into what's called the North Carolina District Trust, I believe is the name of the organization. That's essentially a political action committee to defend the lines that were drawn by the most recent legislature. But you're right, it is, Ken, this is something that is unfolding before our eyes. I will say, unrelated to this or tangentially related, I have never felt so humbled and so challenged in my profession as I have in the last year, particularly in the last 2 months. I have talked to a dozen reporters just this week about how to make sense about what's happening, both politically in the longer term and in the shorter term in terms of what we've seen in the last 2 weeks. It's not easy.
Susan?
It took a lot of people by surprise.
Susan, to answer that question about how many states have independent commissions, Wikipedia has come to the rescue, of course. California, Arizona, Idaho, and Washington State.
Thank you, that's helpful to me.
Well, Susan, Mike, Ken, Susan Powell, Julie, Ron, Elian, thank you guys so much for your presentations. This really has been wonderful. Mike, any concluding
No,
remarks?
I just want to say thank you. If we can give a big round of applause to all the presenters. It's been a really informative and terrific presentation. Really appreciate everybody's contribution, and yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the presentations. I look forward to the next meeting. So, and if you have ideas, definitely shout out and let us know, and we'll be reaching out to you for ideas for future meetings.
Great, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Tom. Susan, good to see you guys.
Great innovation, Mike and Tom.
Thank you. We'll be posting the video on the CMS website. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
David, are you still on?
Thanks, and from our new member, I really enjoyed everything.
We're getting to the after party here, Mike.
Looks like it. That's great. Good. Yeah. Just as follow-up time, I think the only glitch was with the second breakout rooms, figuring out how that works. But that's the only thing I noticed.
I should have. I just renamed the existing rooms, and so that sent everybody off to the room that they had been in before.
Oh, okay. So you have to reset the rooms.
You have to reset the rooms. Yep, you have to recreate them. So sorry about that.
No. Yeah, I think we figured it out. Yeah, Ken and I were both in the same room and wondering, like, who was presenting in that room. But yeah. No,
did you guys figure that out? Did you?
Yeah, we eventually figured it out. It was my room, and then so he came.
Was it labeled correctly? That room?
It was eventually I figured out it was labeled correctly. I think Ken had thought it was his though, because he got kicked in there. And so
Yeah.
he started presenting stuff, and then I finally went in a second time and figured out. I said, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was the only glitch, but I think it was. I mean, the discussions were good. I think it
Were
really,
they?
Yeah, and I think at least for the. Yeah, I think people could have even liked more time. In the breakout rooms. It seems like so.
Well, Mike, kudos to you. You pushed that, and I think that really made a big difference. I also think I didn't join any of them, but from sort of a tired, getting exhausted perspective with sort of Zoom fatigue, I think it really breaks it up and makes
it does break it up. It definitely
makes it
breaks
better.
it
I
up.
mean, it's somewhat like a break.
Yeah.
Just a reset.
Yeah, and it's casual. It's not, I'm not
Right.
watching
You don't have
TV.
to be on as much.
Yeah. So.
All right.
Good. All
Well
right.
done.
Thanks.
Well, I will. I'll get the video, and I guess I'll talk to David about putting it on the CMS site. I will also take the videos for each speaker and break it up, and I'll put those into the gallery with each person's name.
Okay.
It's funny that Jacob Ford showed up to see your Tabla presentation, the one that you were.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I met him through I think it was a New York Map Society meeting, and he did a presentation and showed me this incredible map that he did, a subway type map of the Tabla. So anyway, you should connect. I email
forward him
introduced you.
my email. Yeah, definitely.
I did that already. So
great. Okay. Good.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go have some lunch.
Good. Yeah. No, thank you for running everything, Tom.
Hey, this was good. We did this together for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll do another one. Maybe I've got the CMS annual meeting on May 1st, which I think is
thought about what you're going to do, or are you going to do it virtual?
Oh, I'm pretty sure. I don't see how we can not be virtual.
I was wondering if you were thinking of postponing it, if that would even help. I don't know that it would help, it's hard to know even when you would schedule it for at this point.
I don't know. I like what the Southern California group did, and they broke it up into 2 days. So I think we'll probably keep May 1st and do another day 2 weeks later or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Boy, wasn't Susan Schulten good?
Great. Oh no, it's great. Yeah. She's a great presenter.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thanks, Tom. See you later.
Well.